Hey guys, tonight, a vow of love has turned into something darker. A woman stands at the edge of a choice so heavy it bends the air around her. The cost of betrayal whispers in every shadow, yet the path to justice is steeped in silence and secrets. No one watching knows whose heart will break first, hers or the ones who wronged her. But before you pull that blanket tight and sink into the quiet, consider subscribing and giving this video a gentle like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing where in the world these late-night stories travel. Pull those blankets up, settle in. Now, let's begin. The golden cup shattered against the marble wall, wine spreading like blood across the white stone. Medea stood frozen in the doorway of their bedchamber, watching Jason calmly continue packing his belongings into a leather chest as if nothing had happened. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. Jason didn't look up from folding his ceremonial cloak, the one she had embroidered with protective spells during their first year in Corinth. The marriage contract is already signed. King Creon has agreed to the union. Glausa is young, beautiful, and most importantly, she's Greek. Our children will finally have the legitimacy they deserve. Our children? Medea's voice cracked. What about our marriage? What about everything I sacrificed for you? Now, Jason did look up, his handsome face wearing the patient expression of a man explaining simple facts to a child. Medea, be reasonable. You knew this day would come eventually. A hero of my stature cannot remain married to a foreign sorceress forever. I have my position to consider. The words hit her like physical blows. Foreign sorceress, as if she were some common hedge witch rather than a princess who had commanded dragons and bent the very elements to her will. As if she hadn't been the one to retrieve the golden fleece while he stood paralyzed before the sleepless dragon that guarded it. "I saved your life," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Colchis, when my father would have fed you to the bronze bulls, I gave you the oil that protected your skin from their flames. When the dragon would have devoured you, I sang it to sleep with ancient songs. I betrayed my own father for you. And I'm grateful." "Grateful?" The word exploded from her lips. "You're grateful? I killed my brother for you, Jason. I cut Absyrtus into pieces and scattered them across the sea so my father's ships would have to stop and collect his body for proper burial. I gave up my homeland, my birthright, my very identity to follow you to this cold Greek city, where they look at me like I'm some barbarian curiosity." Jason's jaw tightened. This was not going as smoothly as he had hoped. "That was your choice, Medea. I never asked you to do those things." "You never asked," she laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a sound like breaking glass. "You never asked, but you were happy enough to benefit from them. You wore the crown I helped you win. You enjoyed the glory of being the hero who captured the golden fleece. And now that I'm no longer useful to your ambitions, you discard me like a worn-out sandal." She moved toward him, and Jason instinctively stepped back. There was something in her dark eyes that reminded him suddenly of the way she had looked that night in Colchis when she had stood over her brother's body, knife still dripping.
"The wedding is in 3 days," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll make sure you and the boys are provided for. Perhaps you could return to Colchis, or find sanctuary in Athens. King Aegis has always been sympathetic to exiles."
"You want me to leave Corinth?" It wasn't a question. "It would be best for everyone. Glossa is young and impressionable. Having you here would only complicate things."
Medea studied his face as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The golden beard she had once loved to run her fingers through. The blue eyes that had once gazed at her with desperate gratitude and burning desire. The mouth that had whispered promises of eternal love while she risked everything to save his worthless life.
"Tell me about her," she said quietly. Jason blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in tone. "What?" "Princess Glaus, your bride. Tell me about her." "Medea, I don't think." "Humor me. After 10 years of marriage, surely I deserve to know something about my replacement." Jason hesitated, then seemed to decide that cooperation might be the fastest path through this unpleasant conversation. "She's 17. King Creon's only daughter. She's innocent, pure, the kind of wife a Greek hero should have." Each word was chosen like a dagger thrust. Innocent, unlike Medea, who had blood on her hands. Pure, unlike Medea, who had corrupted herself with dark magic. Greek, unlike Medea, who would always be the foreign witch who had ensnared their hero with her barbaric spells. "And you love her?" Medea asked. Jason's pause was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. "Love is a luxury for young men and foolish poets. I'm building a dynasty, Medea. My sons need legitimacy, and I need allies. This marriage secures both." "Your sons," she tasted the words like poison. "And what of the sons I gave you, Murmeros and Pheres? Do they suddenly cease to be your children because you're acquiring a Greek wife to bear you better ones?" "They'll always be my sons, but legally, socially, you must understand the complications their birth creates. If Glausa bears me sons, those children will inherit everything. It's the natural order." The natural order. As if there was anything natural about abandoning the woman who had made his glory possible. As if there was anything orderly about a hero who owed his greatest triumph to the very person he now cast aside. Medea walked to the window that overlooked the courtyard where her 2 sons were playing with wooden swords, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Murmeros, 8 years old, with Jason's golden hair and her own dark eyes. Pheres, barely 6, who had inherited her gift for seeing things others could not. Beautiful boys who would wake tomorrow to discover their father had decided they were inconvenient obstacles to his ambitions. "I need to think," she said finally, her back still turned to Jason. "There's nothing to think about. The decision is made." Now she did turn, and Jason actually took another step backward. The woman looking at him bore little resemblance to the wife who had greeted him with kisses and wine when he returned from his morning exercises. This woman's eyes held the cold depth of winter seas, and when she spoke, her voice carried the whisper of ancient powers that made the hair on his arms stand on end. "Yes," she said softly, "I suppose it is." The oil lamp flickered in Medea's private chamber as she sat before her mirror, but the face staring back at her seemed to belong to a stranger. When had these lines appeared around her eyes? When had her skin lost the luminous quality that had once made Jason compare her to Aphrodite herself? She was only 27, but 10 years of exile had aged her in ways that the mirror could barely capture. She had been 17 when Jason first looked at her across her father's throne room, the same age as his precious Glossa now. A princess in her own right, daughter to a king, heir to centuries of magical knowledge that the Greeks could barely comprehend. She had commanded respect and fear in equal measure, had conversed with dragons as easily as she spoke with her handmaidens. Now she was a foreign wife, tolerated only as long as she remained useful. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mama?" She turned to find Murmeros peeking around the doorway, his golden hair tousled from sleep. Behind him, she could see Pheres clutching his favorite wooden horse. "We heard shouting," Murmeros said, his 8-year-old face creased with worry. "Is Papa angry about something?" Medea's heart clenched. How could she explain to them that their father had just discarded them all like broken pottery, that they would wake tomorrow to find themselves bastards instead of princes? "Come here, my loves." She opened her arms, and both boys rushed to her, climbing into her lap as they had done since they were tiny. They smelled like sunshine and olive oil, like the innocence that Jason's ambition would soon shatter. "Papa is making some changes," she said carefully. "He's going to marry a Greek princess." Pheres looked up at her with eyes that were far too knowing for a 6-year-old. "What about you, Mama? What about us?" "I don't know yet, little one. But whatever happens, remember that you are princes. Your grandfather was King Aeetes of Colchis, master of the Golden Fleece. Your blood carries the power of Helios, the sun god himself. Never let anyone tell you that you are less than what you are." Murmeros frowned. "But if Papa marries someone else, does that mean we won't be his sons anymore?" The question hit her like a physical blow. In the Greek world, legitimacy was everything. Bastard sons could inherit nothing, could claim no status, could be cast out with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. Jason's new Greek sons would be princes, while her boys would be reduced to begging for scraps of their father's attention. "You will always be his sons," she said fiercely. "Nothing can change that. Blood is blood." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. In 3 days, Jason would pledge himself to another woman, and her children would become inconvenient reminders of his past. Obstacles to be managed, not sons to be cherished. After she had tucked them back into bed, Medea made her way to the small shrine in the corner of their quarters, not to any Greek god, but to Hecate, goddess of magic and crossroads, who had been her patron since childhood. The bronze statue seemed to gleam in the lamplight, its three faces representing past, present, and future. "Show me," she whispered, placing her hands on the altar. "Show me what path I should take." The familiar tingle of divine connection ran through her fingers, and suddenly the room seemed to shift around her. She found herself standing not in her chamber, but in the palace courtyard, watching scenes play out like shadows on a wall. She saw Jason's wedding day, herself and the children standing in the crowd like common spectators, while he pledged eternal love to a girl young enough to be her sister. She saw Glaus, radiant in cloth of gold, accepting the crown that should have been Medea's to wear. She saw her sons pushed further and further from their father's attention as new children were born, legitimate children who would inherit everything, while Murmeros and Pharis were forgotten. But there were other visions too, darker possibilities. She saw Jason weeping over a funeral pyre, his golden hair turned gray with grief. She saw King Creon's palace empty and silent, its halls echoing with the ghost of laughter that would never return. She saw herself standing alone in a place she didn't recognize, powerful and terrible and utterly without love. The visions faded, leaving her gasping in her own chamber once more. Hecate's statue seemed to be smiling, but it was impossible to tell which face, past, present, or future, bore that terrible expression. Three paths stretched before her. Acceptance, swallowing her pride and her rage, taking whatever scraps Jason offered, living the rest of her life as a discarded woman whose only worth lay in the sons she had borne him. Flight, gathering the children and fleeing to Athens or beyond, starting over with nothing but her magic and her memories. Or the third path whispered to her from the darkest corners of her heart. Revenge. Perfect, absolute revenge that would make Jason understand exactly what he had chosen to destroy. She thought of the years she had spent in Corinth, slowly softening the harder edges of her nature, learning to be more Greek and less herself. She had stopped speaking Colchian to her children so they would fit in better. She had hidden her most powerful spells, pretending to be nothing more than a skilled herbalist. She had smiled graciously at dinner parties where the other wives whispered about the foreign sorceress their hero had been foolish enough to marry. All of it, every compromise, every humiliation, every moment she had made herself smaller to fit into Jason's world, had been for nothing. He had decided she was an embarrassment to be discarded anyway. A knock at the outer door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young slave girl, one of King Creon's household, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Begging your pardon, lady, but the king requests your presence in his private study. He says it's urgent." As the girl hurried away, Medea looked once more at Hecate's shrine, the goddess of crossroads, of choices that could not be undone. Three faces looking in different directions, seeing all possibilities. "Help me choose wisely," she whispered. But deep in her heart, she feared she had already chosen. The only question now was whether she had the courage or the ruthlessness to walk the path that beckoned from the shadows. Medea's pulse quickened. Creon would want to discuss the practical arrangements, no doubt. When she would leave Corinth, what provisions would be made for her and the children, how to handle the transition with minimal scandal, the mundane details of destroying a family. "Tell His Majesty I will attend him shortly," she said. "Jason is not yet your son-in-law. The contracts are signed, the dowry agreed upon. The marriage will proceed in 3 days as planned." His voice grew firmer, more kingly. "Which is why you must leave Corinth immediately." Medea felt something cold settle in her chest. "I see. And my children?" "Take them with you, tonight if possible, certainly before the wedding ceremony." "How generous of you to give me permission to take my own sons." King Creon's private study reeked of anxiety and expensive wine. The aging monarch sat hunched behind his desk, his normally pristine beard unkempt, his fingers drumming nervously against the wooden surface. When Medea entered, he didn't bother with the usual courtesies. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We need to discuss your situation." Medea remained standing. "My situation, Your Majesty? I wasn't aware I had one." Creon's eyes darted to the door, then back to her. "Don't play games with me, sorceress. I know what you are. I know what you're capable of. And I know that my son-in-law's decision has put us all in a very dangerous position." Creon stood abruptly, wine sloshing from the cup at his elbow. "This is not a negotiation, woman. This is an order. I want you gone from my city before you can cause unpleasantness." "What unpleasantness might that be, Your Majesty? I'm merely a discarded wife, after all. What harm could I possibly do?" The king's face flushed red. "I was there the night you arrived in Corinth 10 years ago. I saw what was left of that merchant ship that tried to cheat Jason in the harbor. I remember how the crew screamed when their own cargo holds caught fire from the inside. You may play the grieving wife for others, but I know exactly what kind of monster my daughter is marrying into this family to replace." Medea smiled, and Creon actually stepped backward. "Monster, Your Majesty? That's quite harsh. I prefer to think of myself as thorough. My daughter is innocent. She has nothing to do with the choices Jason made years ago. If you have grievances, take them up with him, not with a 17-year-old girl who doesn't even know what magic is." Innocent. Medea tasted the word like wine gone sour. Yes, Jason mentioned that. How refreshing for him to have an innocent wife. Someone pure and untainted by the messy business of actually helping him achieve his legendary status. "I'm warning you. And I'm warning you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The wine in Creon's cup began to steam, then suddenly froze solid. "Be very careful how you speak to the daughter of Aeetes. I may be a discarded wife, but I am still a princess of Colchis, and my patience has limits." Creon stared at the frozen wine, then slowly sat back down. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Name your price. What will it take for you to leave peacefully?" "My price?" Medea laughed, and the sound made the oil lamps flicker. "My price, your majesty, is my life back. My price is my children's legitimacy restored. My price is 10 years of exile and humiliation erased. Can you give me that?" "I can give you gold, ships, safe passage to any city in the Mediterranean, a new identity if necessary. What I want cannot be bought." "Then what do you want?" Medea was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes fixed on something beyond the king's shoulder. When she spoke, her voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "I want Jason to understand what he has chosen to destroy. I want him to know the true cost of his ambition. I want him to lie awake at night for the rest of his life, remembering what he had and what he threw away for the promise of Greek legitimacy." That sounds suspiciously like a threat. Does it? She tilted her head, genuinely curious. I thought it sounded like justice. Creon's hand moved instinctively toward the dagger at his belt, then stopped. What good would a bronze blade do against a woman who could freeze wine with a glance? "You have until dawn," he said finally. "Pack whatever you can carry and be gone from my city. If you're still here when the sun rises, I'll have you arrested for threatening the crown. On what authority do you banish me? I have committed no crime." "You're a foreign sorceress with a history of violence, and you've just threatened my daughter's wedding. That's crime enough." Medea nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for future use. "Very well. Dawn it is. But tell me, your majesty, does your innocent daughter know what kind of man she's marrying? Does she know that her beloved Jason abandoned his first wife the moment she became inconvenient? Does she know that Greek heroes are only as loyal as their current ambitions?" "My daughter will be protected." "Will she? The same way Jason protected me when he swore eternal love at our wedding? The same way he protected our children when he decided they were obstacles to his greater glory?" Medea leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Heroes have such short memories, your majesty. They forget their promises as easily as they forget their debts." She rose from her chair with fluid grace, her movements somehow both elegant and predatory. "But don't worry about your precious daughter. I'm sure Jason will remain faithful to her for, at least as long as she remains useful." "Get out." "Gladly. But before I go, let me give you some advice, king to king. The next time you want to threaten a sorceress, make sure you have better protection than bronze daggers and royal authority. Both are painfully inadequate against someone who learned magic at the feet of Circe herself." As she reached the door, Creon called after her. "Medea, whatever you're planning." She turned back, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. The grieving wife and threatened mother disappeared, replaced by something far older and more terrible. Her eyes held the depth of winter storms, and when she smiled, Creon could swear he saw flames dancing behind her teeth. "I'm not planning anything, Your Majesty. I'm simply remembering who I used to be." The door closed behind her with barely a whisper, but somehow it sounded like the tolling of a funeral bell. Dawn was still 3 hours away when Medea descended into the deepest cellars beneath their quarters, carrying a small oil lamp and a leather satchel of materials she hadn't touched in years. The stone walls were damp with moisture from the underground springs that fed Corinth's fountains, and the air carried the metallic taste of deep earth and old magic. She had built this workshop in secret during their second year in the city, when she still believed she might need to defend herself and her family against hostile Greeks. Over time, as Jason's position became more secure and her life more comfortable, she had stopped visiting this place. The jars of powdered nightshade and distilled mercury had gathered dust. The bronze cauldron had grown green with verdigris. The ancient texts, written in the flowing script of Colchis, had remained unopened. Tonight, she lit the brazier and began to work. The formula came back to her as easily as breathing. She had learned it from her Aunt Circe, who had learned it from older powers still. It was not a poison in any conventional sense. Poison could be detected, neutralized, treated by skilled healers. This was something far more elegant and terrible. As she ground the ingredients, saffron from Media, silver from the mines beneath Mount Caucasus, her own tears shed over the dying body of her brother, she let her mind drift back to that night in Colchis when she had first realized she loved Jason. He had been so beautiful in the firelight, his golden hair catching the glow from the braziers as he spoke with desperate passion about his quest. The golden fleece wasn't just a prize to him, he had insisted. It was vindication, proof that he was worthy of the throne his uncle had stolen. Without it, he would remain nothing more than an exile with a famous name. She had believed him then, had seen something noble in his ambition, something romantic in his willingness to risk everything for glory. She had been 17 and foolish, and so desperately in love that she would have followed him into the underworld itself. Now she understood that Jason's greatest talent had never been heroism. It was making other people want to sacrifice themselves for his dreams. The mixture in the cauldron began to glow with its own inner light, not the warm yellow of flames, but something colder and more alien. Medea whispered the final incantations in the ancient language of her people, words that had never been written down because they were too dangerous to preserve. When it was finished, she poured the liquid into a small vial that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. To the casual observer, it would appear to be nothing more than expensive perfumed oil, the kind wealthy women used to scent their skin. But any fabric soaked in this substance would become a garment of living fire, flames that burned from within, that could not be extinguished by water or earth or any mortal means. The second part was easier. A simple draught that would taste like honey wine, but would stop a human heart within moments of touching the lips. She prepared enough for 2 goblets and sealed them in matching vials. As she worked, she found herself thinking about her children sleeping in their beds above. Murmuros with his serious eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. Pheres with his gift for seeing hidden things, and his habit of collecting smooth stones from the garden paths. They would wake tomorrow to find their world completely changed. But perhaps that was necessary. Perhaps it was time they learned that the blood of Colchis was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be feared. When she climbed back to the main level, she found Jason waiting in their sitting room, pacing like a caged leopard. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "It's nearly dawn. The servants are talking. They say Creon wants you gone before the wedding." "Your future father-in-law was quite direct about his feelings," Medea said mildly, setting her satchel carefully on a side table. "He seems to think I might cause unpleasantness. And will you?" She studied his face, the face she had once traced with gentle fingers in the darkness, the mouth that had whispered promises against her throat. Now she saw the calculation behind her eyes, the way he held himself ready to flee at the first sign of her displeasure. "That depends," she said finally. "Are you here to gloat or to negotiate?" "I'm here because, despite everything, I don't want to see you hurt. You're the mother of my sons, Medea. That means something." "Does it? Then why does your new marriage contract specify that any previous children will have no claim on your estate?" Jason's face flushed. "How did you—" "I have friends in unexpected places, Jason. The slave who copied the documents for Creon's scribes has a daughter with a withered arm. I healed the child last winter, and the mother remembers kindness." Medea's voice remained perfectly pleasant, as if they were discussing the weather. "So yes, I know exactly how much our sons mean to you. Legally speaking, they will be worth precisely nothing once you marry your innocent princess. It's not about worth, it's about legitimacy. The boys will always be my blood, but in Greek law—" "Greek law," she spat the words like a curse. "Everything comes back to Greek law, doesn't it? Greek customs, Greek legitimacy, Greek wives for Greek heroes. Tell me, Jason, was I not Greek enough when I was saving your life? Was my magic too foreign when it was winning you the golden fleece? You're twisting everything." "Am I? Then explain to me how the woman who made your victory possible is suddenly unfit to share in your triumph. Explain how the mother of your children is suddenly too barbaric to remain in your bed." Jason ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early days together when he was frustrated with some military strategy that wasn't working. "The world has changed, Medea. Greece is becoming more unified, more civilized. The old ways, the wild magic and blood sacrifices, people are moving away from that. They want heroes who represent order, stability, the future, rather than the past." And I represent the past? You represent chaos, power without restraint, the kind of magic that terrifies people even when it helps them. His voice grew gentler, almost pleading. You're magnificent, Medea, but you're also dangerous. Can't you understand why that makes people nervous? For a moment, she almost softened. There was something in his voice that reminded her of the young man who had looked at her with such desperate gratitude when she agreed to help him. But then she remembered the marriage contract, the clause about previous children, the careful legal language that reduced her sons to inconvenient footnotes in Jason's glorious future. You know what I find interesting? She said conversationally. You married me for my power. You needed my magic to succeed, so you wooed me with pretty words and passionate promises. But now that you don't need that power anymore, now that you have your reputation and your glory, suddenly that same power is inconvenient, dangerous, something to be hidden away. It's not that simple, isn't it? You used me, Jason. You used my love, my magic, my willingness to sacrifice everything for your dreams. And now that I've served my purpose, you're discarding me for a younger model who won't complicate your political ambitions. The truth of it hung in the air between them like a blade. Jason's face went through several expressions: denial, anger, guilt, and finally a kind of weary resignation. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. The contracts are signed. The alliance with Creon is crucial for Corinth's future. I can't change what's already been decided. You could have chosen not to decide it in the first place. And then what? Remain married to a foreign sorceress while my enemies whisper that Jason of Iolcus is too weak to control his own wife? Watch as my sons grow up as outsiders in their own city because their mother's reputation makes them unmarriable? Our sons will be unmarriable anyway once you legitimize your new children. They'll be bastards, Jason. Bastards with a dangerous mother and a father who's ashamed of them. The words hit their target. Jason flinched as if she had struck him physically. I'm not ashamed. Then prove it. Call off the wedding. Honor the vows you made to me. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or regret. But then his jaw set in the stubborn line she knew so well. I can't. The future of Corinth depends on this alliance. Then you've made your choice. Medea picked up her satchel and moved toward the door. And now I'll make mine. The wedding preparations began before sunrise, filling the palace with the sounds of celebration that felt like mockery to Medea's ears. Servants scurried through the corridors, carrying garlands of white roses and olive branches. Musicians tuned their instruments in the great hall. The kitchen slaves hauled amphoras of wine from the cellars, the same wine that would toast Jason's new beginning and her obliteration. Medea had not slept. Instead, she had spent the remaining hours before dawn composing letters, one for each of her sons, to be given to them when they came of age. If they came of age. She sealed them with wax and her own signet ring, the one her father had given her on her 16th birthday, carved with the dragon of Colchis. As the sun climbed higher, she made her preparations with the methodical care of a priestess preparing for ritual sacrifice. She bathed in water scented with herbs from her homeland, thyme for courage, rosemary for remembrance, bitter almond for endings. She dressed in her finest gown, the one she had worn for her own wedding to Jason, deep purple silk shot through with gold thread that caught the light like dragon scales. Around midday, a servant girl appeared at her door, the same nervous creature who had summoned her to Creon's study the night before. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but Princess Glaus requests your presence in her chambers." Medea raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected and potentially useful. "Does she now? How interesting. Tell the princess I would be honored to attend her." The girl's chambers were a testament to 17 years of being King Creon's beloved daughter. Silk cushions embroidered with peacocks and pomegranates, walls painted with scenes of nymphs dancing in eternal spring, silver mirrors that reflected back nothing but beauty and youth and the confidence that came from never having known real hardship. Princess Glaus stood before the largest mirror, examining herself in her wedding dress. She was, Medea had to admit, breathtakingly beautiful. Golden hair fell to her waist in waves that seemed to capture sunlight. Her skin had the luminous quality of fresh cream. Her eyes were the deep blue of summer skies, wide with excitement and innocence. She was everything Medea had been at 17, and everything she could never be again. "Lady Medea," Glaus turned with a smile that could have melted winter. "Thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind my presumption in asking to speak with you." "Not at all, Your Highness, though I confess myself curious about what we might have to discuss." Glaus's smile faltered slightly. "I wanted to, that is, I hoped we might speak honestly, woman to woman." "About Jason, I presume?" "Yes." The princess moved to a cushioned bench and gestured for Medea to join her. "I know this situation must be difficult for you. I can't imagine how I would feel if... But Father says it's common for heroes to have foreign wives from their adventures, and that it's equally common for them to make more suitable marriages later." Medea settled gracefully onto the bench, her expression carefully neutral. "Your father is well versed in the customs of heroes. I want you to know that Jason came to Father with the proposal. I didn't seek him out or try to steal him from you. The marriage was arranged for political reasons." How refreshing to meet someone so honest about the transactional nature of marriage. Glaus's cheeks flushed pink. "I don't mean to sound callous. It's just that I wanted you to understand that I harbor no personal animosity toward you. In fact, I've heard remarkable stories about your abilities, the golden fleece, the dragon, all of it. You must have been very brave." "Brave or very foolish," The distinction becomes clearer with age. Jason speaks of you with great respect, Glaus continued earnestly. He says you were essential to his success, that he owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. How fortunate that he's found a way to avoid the attempt. The barb seemed to go over the girl's head entirely. Glaus leaned forward with the earnest intensity of someone trying to solve a problem through pure goodwill. I was hoping, that is, I thought perhaps we might find a way for this transition to be less painful for everyone involved. Your sons could visit their father regularly. You could remain in Corinth if you wished, perhaps in a smaller house in the city. I would make certain you were treated with the respect due to the mother of Jason's children. Medea stared at her for a long moment. The girl was genuinely trying to be kind, in the way that someone who had never experienced real loss might try to bandage a severed limb with silk ribbons. "You would do that?" Medea asked softly. "You would allow your husband's former wife to remain nearby, a constant reminder of his past attachments?" "If it would make things easier, yes. I have no desire to see you or your children suffer." "And what does Jason think of this generous plan?" Glaus's expression grew uncertain. "We haven't discussed the details yet, but I'm sure he would agree. He's a good man, Lady Medea. He simply finds himself in an impossible situation." "An impossible situation?" Medea repeated the words thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it." She rose and moved to the window that overlooked the courtyard where preparations for the evening ceremony were in full swing. Musicians tested their instruments, while servants hung garlands between the columns. In a few hours, this space would be filled with Corinth's nobility, all come to witness Jason's triumph over his inconvenient past. "May I give you some advice, Princess?" she said without turning around. "Of course. Learn to recognize when men are lying to you. It's a skill that will serve you well in marriage." "I don't understand." Now Medea did turn, and something in her expression made Glaus instinctively draw back. "Jason didn't find himself in an impossible situation, child. He created one. He made promises to me that he had no intention of keeping, just as he's making promises to you that he'll break the moment something better comes along. That's not true. He loves me. He loves your youth, your political connections, your ability to give him legitimate Greek heirs. But you yourself?" Medea shook her head sadly. "You're 17 years old. You know nothing about love or men or the price of trusting heroes with your heart." Glaus's face flushed with anger now, not embarrassment. "You're trying to poison me against him because you're jealous, because you can't bear that he's chosen someone younger and more suitable." "Perhaps," Medea smiled, and the expression held no warmth whatsoever. "Or perhaps I'm trying to save you from making the same mistakes I did, but I suspect you won't listen. The young never do." She moved toward the door, then paused as if struck by a sudden thought. I do have a wedding gift for you, actually, something to commemorate this joyous occasion. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. A gown made in the old style of Colchis. I wore it for my own wedding, but I think it would suit you beautifully. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Glaus accepted the box hesitantly. That's very kind of you, but I already have my wedding dress. Not for today, dear child. For tomorrow, when you wake up as Jason's wife and discover what that truly means. Think of it as armor for the battles you don't yet know you'll need to fight. Lady Medea. But Medea was already at the door, her hand on the latch. She turned back one final time, and her voice carried the weight of prophecy. Enjoy your wedding day, princess. Treasure every moment of joy, every smile, every loving word. Hold them close to your heart, because they're the last pure happiness you'll ever know. The door closed behind her with finality, leaving Glaus alone with her wedding dress, her innocent dreams, and a wooden box that seemed to grow heavier in her hands with each passing moment. The ceremony began at sunset, as tradition demanded. Medea stood in the shadows at the back of the great courtyard, invisible among the crowd of lesser nobles and foreign dignitaries who had come to witness Jason's triumph. She had wrapped herself in a dark cloak that concealed both her identity and the vengeful gleam in her eyes. King Creon presided over the ritual with obvious pride, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he proclaimed the union between his house and the hero of the Golden Fleece. Jason stood resplendent in cloth of gold, every inch the legendary figure that bards sang about in taverns across the Mediterranean. When Princess Glausa appeared, a collective sigh rose from the gathered crowd. She was radiant. The traditional Greek bridal gown transformed her from a pretty girl into something ethereal, almost divine. Her golden hair was crowned with white roses, and her face glowed with happiness so pure it seemed to light the gathering dusk. She looked at Jason as if he were a god descended from Olympus specifically for her pleasure. And when he took her hand, she smiled with the trust of someone who had never been betrayed. Medea felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, which had already been shattered, but something deeper. The last vestige of the woman who had believed in love, in promises, in the possibility that sacrifice might be rewarded with loyalty. As the couple exchanged vows, Jason's voice rang out across the courtyard. I take you, Glaus, daughter of Creon, to be my wife and queen. I pledge to honor you above all others, to protect you from all harm, to remain faithful until death itself parts us. The same words he had spoken to Medea 10 years ago in a grove sacred to Hera, goddess of marriage. The same promises he had whispered against her throat on their wedding night, when she was 17 and foolish enough to believe in forever. The crowd erupted in cheers as the couple kissed. Musicians struck up the traditional wedding songs, while servants began distributing wine and honey cakes to the guests. Medea slipped away before anyone could notice her presence, melting back into the palace corridors like a shadow. In her chambers, she found her children waiting. Murmuros and Pheres had dressed in their finest tunics, their faces bright with confused excitement. They had been told this was a celebration, but they didn't understand why their father was marrying someone else, or why their mother looked like she might shatter at any moment. "Mama," Pheres tugged at her cloak with small hands. "Why didn't we go to Papa's wedding? I wanted to see the princess everyone's talking about." "Because we weren't invited, little one." Medea knelt and pulled both boys into her arms, breathing in their familiar scent of sunshine and olive oil. "But that's all right. We have our own celebration to attend to." She had prepared a feast for them in her private sitting room, all their favorite foods, as if this were a festival day. Honeyed figs and almond cakes, fresh bread with the soft cheese they loved, wine mixed with water for Murmuros, and sweet milk for Pheres. She served them herself, playing the gracious hostess while her heart bled with every smile. "Are we going to live somewhere else now?" Murmuros asked, with the uncomfortable perception of an 8-year-old who understood more than adults realized. "Perhaps. Would that frighten you?" "Not if you come with us," he said solemnly. "We're a family. Families stay together." The words hit her like physical blows. Families stay together. Such a simple concept, yet Jason had apparently found it impossible to grasp. As the night deepened and the sounds of celebration continued outside, Medea told her sons stories from her homeland. Tales of dragons and golden cities, of magic that could move mountains and love that conquered death. She spoke of their grandfather, King Aeetes, and the power that flowed in their veins. She wanted them to understand their heritage, to know they were descended from gods and heroes and queens.
"Will we ever see Colchis?" Pheres asked sleepily. "Perhaps, my darling. Perhaps sooner than you think." When both boys had finally succumbed to exhaustion, she carried them to their beds and tucked them in with the tenderness of a mother who knew she might never do so again. She kissed their foreheads and whispered protective charms in the ancient language, blessings that would follow them no matter how far they traveled or how dark the path became.
Then she returned to her sitting room and waited. The wedding feast would continue until dawn, as was customary. Jason and his new bride would retire to the bridal chamber that had been prepared in the palace's most luxurious quarters. The same chambers where Medea had spent her own wedding night, believing herself the most fortunate woman in the world. Around midnight, she heard familiar footsteps in the corridor outside. A moment later, Jason appeared in the doorway, still wearing his wedding finery, but looking strangely uncertain. "I saw the light under your door," he said. "I wanted to make sure, that is, I hoped we could speak one final time before you leave tomorrow." "How thoughtful of you to spare time from your wedding celebration." "Medea, please, this doesn't have to be ugly between us." "Doesn't it?" She rose from her chair with fluid grace, and Jason was struck by how beautiful she still was, even in her grief. "Tell me, husband, How exactly should it be between us? Cordial? Friendly? Should I congratulate you on your successful upgrade? I've arranged for a house in Athens. Aegeus has agreed to grant you sanctuary, and there's a substantial purse to ensure you and the boys are comfortable. You'll want for nothing. Except for our family, our life, our future. She moved closer, and Jason found himself remembering the way she used to look at him when they were alone together, with eyes that promised paradise and destruction in equal measure. Tell me something, Jason. When you were pledging eternal fidelity to your virgin bride tonight, did you think of me at all? Did you remember that you've made those same promises before? Our marriage was different. We were different people then. Were we? Or have you simply decided to become someone else now that it's convenient? Jason's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Why must you make this so difficult? I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. Best for everyone? Medea laughed, and the sound held no humor whatsoever. How is it best for your sons to become bastards? How is it best for me to become a discarded foreign whore whose only value was the magic she brought to your bed? That's not... You're twisting my words. Am I? Then explain to me how abandoning your family serves anyone's interests except your own. They stared at each other across the space that had once been their shared refuge from the world. The room seemed smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of 10 years of shared intimacy and the poison of ultimate betrayal. I didn't come here to fight, Jason said finally. I came to say goodbye, and to tell you that, despite everything, I'll always be grateful for what you've given me. Grateful. Medea savored the word like wine gone to vinegar. Yes, you mentioned that before. Your gratitude is overwhelming. I loved you, Medea. In my way, I did love you. In your way, she nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose you did. The way a man loves a tool that serves him well. The way he loves a weapon that wins him battles. But you never loved me the way a husband loves a wife, or a man loves a woman. You loved what I could do for you. Jason's face flushed with anger and guilt. That's not fair. Fairness? Now her voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it filled the room with menace. You want to speak to me about fairness? Very well. Let me tell you what would be fair, Jason. Fair would be you honoring your vows to me. Fair would be your sons inheriting the status their birth deserves. Fair would be you remembering who made your victory possible before you decided to write me out of the story. She moved even closer now, close enough that he could smell the familiar scent of the oils she used in her hair. Close enough to remember the way she felt in his arms during those first passionate years. But since fairness seems to be beyond your capabilities, she continued, perhaps we should speak instead of justice, of consequences, of what happens to men who break sacred oaths and betray the women who saved their lives. Something in her tone made Jason step backward. his hand moving instinctively toward the dagger at his belt. "Are you threatening me?" Medea smiled, and in that expression, Jason saw something that reminded him of the night in Colchis when she had stood over her brother's mutilated corpse, knife dripping with blood and eyes bright with terrible purpose. "Threatening you? Oh no, my dear husband. I'm simply reminding you that actions have consequences, that every choice creates ripples, that sometimes those ripples become waves that sweep away everything we think we've built." Medea! Go back to your wedding feast, Jason. Go back to your innocent bride and your dreams of legitimate sons. Enjoy this night, because it's the last one you'll ever spend believing you're the hero of this story. The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Jason stared at her for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the woman he had married and then discarded. Not a convenient foreign sorceress, but a princess of an ancient line, a wielder of powers he had never truly understood, a force of nature that he had been fool enough to think he could control. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Medea alone with the darkness and the terrible clarity of what she had to do. The palace fell into the deep silence that comes after great celebrations, when even the servants have collapsed from exhaustion and the wine-soaked guests have stumbled home or found corners to sleep off their revelry. Medea moved through the corridors like a ghost, her bare feet making no sound on the cold marble floors. She found the bridal chamber easily. It blazed with oil lamps and was strewn with rose petals, a monument to young love and new beginnings. The door stood slightly ajar, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices within. Jason and his bride sharing their first private moments as husband and wife. Medea pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway and listened. "Never imagined it could be like this," Glaus was saying, her voice breathy with wonder and exhaustion. "The stories the women tell, they made it sound frightening, but with you? You're perfect." Jason's voice, rough with satisfied desire. "Beautiful and pure, and everything a hero's wife should be." Pure. There was that word again, like a blade twisted in an old wound. Medea closed her eyes and remembered her own wedding night, when Jason had whispered similar endearments against her throat. Back then, her purity had been exciting to him, the challenge of awakening passion in a virgin princess. Now, apparently, purity was desirable because it meant no complicated history, no inconvenient expectations. "Jason?" Glaus's voice was softer now, uncertain. "Lady Medea came to see me this afternoon. She gave me a gift, a gown from Colchis. She seemed sad. I felt sorry for her." "You have a kind heart." Jason's tone carried the indulgent warmth of a man explaining adult matters to a child. "But you mustn't let her manipulate your sympathies. Medea is dangerous when she feels cornered." "Dangerous? But she's just a woman, a mother." "She's a sorceress, Glaus. She's killed before, and she's capable of things you can't imagine. Promise me you'll stay away from her until she leaves Corinth." She's leaving? Tomorrow. Your father has made it clear that her presence is no longer welcome. There was a long pause, then Glaus spoke again, her voice troubled. It seems cruel, sending her away from her children's father. Where will she go? Athens, probably. She has connections there. She'll be fine. Women like Medea always land on their feet. Women like Medea, as if she were some common courtesan instead of a princess who had sacrificed everything for love. What about your sons? Another pause, longer this time. When Jason spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. They'll be provided for. They're my blood, whatever else might be true. But legally, they have no claim on my estate or titles. That's the way of things, Glaus. I can't change the law to suit my personal feelings. It just seems unfair. They didn't choose to be born illegitimate. No, they didn't. But I can't build my dynasty on fairness. I have to think about the future, about the sons you'll give me. Our children will inherit everything, and they'll need every advantage to succeed in this world. Medea heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of a couple settling into sleep. She waited until their breathing grew deep and regular, then slipped away into the darkness. In her own chambers, she made her final preparations with the methodical care of a priestess preparing for sacred ritual. She dressed in traveling clothes, a simple brown cloak that would make her unremarkable on the roads. She packed a small bag with essential items, gold coins sewn into the lining, a few precious herbs that couldn't be found outside Colchis, the letters she had written to her sons. The 2 vials from her cellar workshop went into a special pocket, cushioned with silk to prevent any accidental breakage. The wooden box she had given to Glausa would already be working its subtle influence. The princess would wake with an inexplicable desire to try on the beautiful Colchian gown, to see how she looked in the exotic foreign silk. As dawn approached, she made one final visit to her children's room. They slept peacefully in their beds, Murmuros with one arm thrown over his eyes, Pheres curled around his wooden horse like a much younger child. In sleep, they looked impossibly innocent, untouched by the adult world of betrayal and consequence that was about to engulf them. She had wrestled with this decision all night, torn between maternal love and the terrible mathematics of revenge. If she took them with her, they would spend their lives as exiles, always looking over their shoulders, always wondering when their father's enemies might strike. If she left them behind, they would be raised by Jason and his new wife, but they would be alive, safe, provided for. The choice had been made for her when she overheard Jason's conversation with Glaus. Our children will inherit everything. The sons she gave him would be princes, while Medea's boys would be tolerated bastards, dependent on their father's grudging charity and their stepmother's unlikely kindness. Better they should die as princes of Colchis than live as beggars in Corinth. She knelt beside Murmuros first, pressing a vial to his lips. The liquid tasted like honey, and he swallowed reflexively without waking. She stroked his golden hair as the poison began its work, whispering ancient lullabies in the language of her homeland. He sighed once, deeply, and then his breathing simply stopped. Ferez was harder. He woke as she lifted his head, blinking at her with sleepy confusion. "Mama, is it morning?" "Not yet, my darling. Go back to sleep." "Are we leaving today?" "Yes, little one. We're going on a long journey." He accepted the drink trustingly, the way children do when their mothers offer them medicine. As he drifted back into sleep, permanent this time, she sang him the song she had crooned to him as a baby, about brave princes and magical kingdoms beyond the sunrise. When it was finished, she arranged them in their beds as if they were simply sleeping. To any casual observer, they would appear peaceful, untroubled. Only a close examination would reveal that their hearts had stopped beating. She kissed each forehead one final time, breathing in the scent of their hair, memorizing the weight of their small bodies in her arms. Then she sealed the room with a locking charm that would keep anyone from entering until she was ready. The hardest part was done. Now came the easy part. Revenge. As the sun climbed higher and the palace began to stir with morning activity, Medea made her way to the kitchen complex. The servants were already busy preparing the morning meal for the newlyweds and their guests. It was simple enough to slip among them, just another woman helping with the feast. No one questioned her presence. After 10 years in the palace, she was as familiar as the furniture. She found what she was looking for in the pantry: 2 matching silver goblets that had been set aside for the royal couple's private breakfast. They would wake soon, hungry from their exertions, eager to begin their first day as husband and wife. The kitchen slaves would bring them fresh bread and honey, fruit from the royal orchards, and wine mixed with water to settle their stomachs. Medea poured her prepared poison into both cups, watching it swirl invisibly through the wine. Then she stepped back and waited. The trays went up to the bridal chamber, carried by giggling servant girls who whispered about the sounds they had heard in the night. Medea followed at a distance, positioning herself where she could observe but not be seen. Through the partially open door, she watched Jason and Glaus break their fast. The princess looked radiant in the morning light. Her golden hair tumbled around her shoulders, her face glowing with satisfied contentment. She chattered happily about the wedding, about her new life, about the children they would have together. Jason listened with indulgent affection, occasionally reaching over to touch her cheek or stroke her hair. He looked younger this morning, Medea realized, as if marrying his innocent princess had somehow restored his own lost youth. They raised their goblets in a toast to their future. The wine went down smoothly, tasting of nothing but honey and hopes. For a few moments, nothing happened. They continued eating, laughing, planning their day. Then Glaus paused, her hand going to her throat. "I feel strange," she said. Jason looked at her with concern. "What kind of strange?" "Hot. My heart is racing." She stood up abruptly, then swayed and had to grip the table for support. "Jason, something's wrong." He was beside her in an instant, catching her as she began to collapse. Her face had gone deathly pale, her breathing shallow and rapid. Jason looked around wildly for help. Then, suddenly, his own legs gave out beneath him. "The wine!" he gasped, understanding flooding his features. "The wine is poisoned." They fell together, husband and wife united in their final moments. Jason tried to call for help, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. Glaus's eyes found his, wide with terror and confusion, silently asking why this was happening to them. But even as they died, Medea's real gift was just beginning to reveal itself. Glaus had indeed worn the Colchian gown that morning, just as Medea had known she would. The beautiful silk clung to her skin like liquid fire, and now that fire was becoming literal. The fabric began to glow with its own inner light, then burst into flames that seemed to burn from within the princess's very flesh. She screamed then, a sound that brought servants running from all directions. But the fire was not natural. It could not be smothered or extinguished. It consumed her from the inside out, while Jason watched in horror, too weakened by poison to help or even to look away. King Creon burst into the chamber just as his daughter collapsed, her body wreathed in flames that left no mark on anything around her. The old king threw himself onto the burning figure, trying to beat out the fire with his bare hands, and the flames eagerly embraced him as well. In moments, both father and daughter were consumed by Medea's gift, their screams echoing through the palace like the wails of the damned. Jason lived long enough to understand what he was seeing, long enough to realize who had orchestrated this perfect revenge. His last sight was of Medea herself, standing in the doorway with an expression of terrible satisfaction. "Now you know," she said softly, "the true cost of betraying a daughter of Helios." Then the poison claimed him too, and Jason the hero died, knowing that his legend would end not in glory but in horror, destroyed by the very woman who had made his greatness possible. The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Jason stared at her for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the woman he had married and then discarded. Not a convenient foreign sorceress, but a princess of an ancient line, a wielder of powers he had never truly understood, a force of nature that he had been fool enough to think he could control. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Medea alone with the darkness and the terrible clarity of what she had to do. The screams brought the entire palace running, but by the time the guards reached the bridal chamber, there was nothing left but ash and the acrid smell of supernatural fire. 3 members of Corinth's royal family had been reduced to gray powder in a matter of minutes, while the marble walls remained untouched and the silk hangings showed not so much as a scorch mark. Medea stood in the courtyard below, watching smoke rise from the palace windows while chaos erupted around her. Servants fled in terror, convinced that the gods themselves had struck down their king and his daughter. Guards shouted contradictory orders, while officials ran about like ants whose hill had been kicked over. None of them paid attention to the foreign woman in the brown traveling cloak who stood perfectly still in the center of the madness, her face turned toward the sky. She was waiting. The wind began as a whisper, then grew into a roar that bent the olive trees and sent roof tiles clattering to the ground. But this was not the random fury of a storm. It moved with purpose, swirling in a tight spiral that lifted dust and debris into the air until it formed a column reaching from earth to heaven. The chariot that descended from the whirlwind was wrought of gold and flame, drawn by dragons whose scales caught the sunlight like jewels. They were her grandfather's gift, sent from the palace of Helios himself in response to her prayers. Divine transport for a divine princess who had completed her sacred duty. As she climbed into the chariot, someone in the crowd finally recognized her. "There!" a guard pointed with a shaking finger. "It's the sorceress! She's done this!" But by then, it was too late. The dragons spread their mighty wings and launched themselves skyward, carrying Medea up and away from the city that had never truly accepted her. As Corinth fell away beneath her feet, she allowed herself one final look at the palace where she had lived as Jason's wife, where she had borne his children, where she had slowly forgotten who she truly was in the name of love. The palace was burning now, not from her magic, but from the panic of servants who had knocked over oil lamps in their terror. Soon there would be nothing left but ruins and stories, cautionary tales about what happened to heroes who forgot their deaths. The wind carried her north and east, toward Athens, where King Aegeus had indeed promised her sanctuary, though not for the reasons Jason had assumed. Aegeus was old and childless, desperate for an heir, and Medea's reputation as a sorceress had reached his ears. He would welcome her not as a refugee, but as a potential solution to his problems. As the hours passed and Greece rolled away beneath the dragon chariot, Medea found herself thinking not about the future, but about the past. About a 17-year-old princess who had believed that love could conquer anything, that sacrifice would be rewarded with loyalty, that heroes were worthy of the devotion they inspired. That girl was dead now, as dead as the children she had borne and the husband she had trusted. In her place sat a woman who understood the true nature of power, not the flashy magic of dragons and golden fleeces, but the deeper sorcery of consequence and choice. Jason had created his own nightmare the moment he decided that Medea's love was disposable. Every choice after that had been inevitable. His marriage to Glaus, Creon's demand that she leave Corinth, her own terrible response to their betrayal. He had set the pieces in motion without understanding the game he was playing. And now he would be remembered not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale about the price of hubris. The dragons flew on through the afternoon, their wings beating a rhythm like thunder. As evening approached, Medea could see Athens rising in the distance, its temples gleaming white against the darkening sky. A new city, a new life, a new king who would learn to appreciate what Jason had thrown away. But first, there was one final duty to perform. She directed the dragons to circle back toward Corinth, following the coastal road where travelers moved in long caravans between the great cities of Greece. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for: a group of merchants and their families, honest folk who would spread the story properly when they reached their destinations. The chariot descended until she hovered just above the road, close enough for the travelers to see her clearly, but high enough that they couldn't touch her. The dragon's presence sent the merchants' horses into a panic, but the humans themselves stood transfixed, staring up at the figure of divine retribution that had materialized above their mundane journey. "People of Greece," Medea's voice carried clearly over the wind, enhanced by the same magic that had once made her whispers audible across her father's throne room. "Hear me and remember. I am Medea, daughter of King Aeetes, granddaughter of Helios, who drives the sun across the sky. I speak now of Jason the Argonaut, called hero by those who do not know the true price of his glory." The merchants and their families listened in terrified fascination as she told them the real story. Not the sanitized version that bards sang in taverns, but the truth of betrayal and consequence. She spoke of a young woman who had sacrificed everything for love, only to be discarded when she became inconvenient. She described a hero who had forgotten that every victory carried a debt, that every triumph was built on the bones of those who had made it possible. "Let this be a lesson to all who would follow in Jason's footsteps," she concluded, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Those who break sacred oaths will find that the very gods remember their promises. Those who betray the ones who saved them will discover that gratitude has a price. And those who mistake love for weakness will learn that a woman scorned by the gods themselves is the most dangerous enemy any man can make." The chariot began to rise again, carrying her toward Athens and whatever future awaited there. But her final words drifted down like a curse that would follow the merchants wherever they traveled, spreading the story to every corner of the known world. Jason of Iolcus created his own nightmare the day he chose ambition over honor. Let his fate serve as warning to any who would walk the same path. The gods see all, remember all, and justice, though it may be delayed, will always find its mark. As the dragons carried her into the gathering dusk, Medea felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the satisfaction of a task completed, a balance restored, a wrong made right. She was no longer the naive princess who had believed in heroes and happy endings. She was no longer the desperate wife who had begged for scraps of affection from a man who saw her only as a tool. She was Medea of Colchis, granddaughter of the sun, wielder of powers that could topple kingdoms and break the proudest hearts. She was vengeance incarnate, justice wearing a woman's face, the living proof that some betrayals carried a price too terrible for mortal men to comprehend. Behind her, Corinth burned. Jason's body lay cold in the ruins of his wedding chamber, surrounded by the ashes of the future he had tried to steal. His sons were dead by their own mother's hand, rather than live as bastards dependent on his charity. His new wife and her father had been consumed by fires that no earthly power could have kindled or quenched. The hero who had won the Golden Fleece, who had sailed with the greatest warriors of his generation, who had been sung about in every court from Iolcus to Troy, was dead. And his death would be remembered not as the noble end of a great man, but as the inevitable consequence of a fool who had forgotten that every story has more than one perspective.
Medea smiled as the chariot carried her toward Athens and a new chapter of her immortal life. Jason's nightmare was complete, but her story was far from over. There would be other kings, other heroes, other men who thought they could use her power without paying the price. They would learn, as Jason had learned, that some debts could only be settled in blood and flame and the screams of the innocent. They would discover, as Jason had discovered, that the woman who could save a hero could just as easily destroy him.
And somewhere in the halls of Olympus, the gods themselves would remember this day and whisper warnings to their mortal favorites. Beware the foreign sorceress who offers aid, for her love and her hatred are equally dangerous, and both are eternal as the turning of the stars. The dragons flew on through the night, carrying their terrible cargo toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Behind them, the flames of Corinth painted the sky red with the light of justice served, and debts finally, perfectly, paid in full.